Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Resource Gatherer podcast. I'm your host, Justin. That's Shaizon, and that's Cody. We are the three now co-hosts of this show, as we're going to be continuing to make episodes every Friday, hopefully, as long as everything goes well. As always, we're going to be talking about some nerdy topic and deep diving into it. So on that note, let's go ahead and get into this week's episode of the Resource Gatherer. On the show, it seems like we've talked about D&D, we've talked about some anime, we've talked about a lot of things that have to do with storytelling and story building. So let's dive into the next element of that. What do you guys think are the most crucial elements when it comes to telling a story?
Damn. See, me personally, the characters. It's always going to be the characters. But that's just me.
What about you, Cody?
I definitely agree with Shaizon. Like, you have to have like rich character backgrounds and stuff like that. Like, you have to have like some level of, I don't know, like synergy with it. Like, you know, you're on this mission because you got to find this magical item, or you got to go and avenge your father or something like that. You know, I think that's always really important in good storytelling, because when you look back between like D&D campaigns or other animes, it's always based on the main character, and they always have a very rich background.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that makes sense. So I think when it comes to storytelling, I think storytelling derives from two different points. The world that you're in, circumferencing all of that. So the background, basically, of the characters that you're providing. And then, as you guys said, the characters. So the characters have impact because they're the things that everyone follows. Those are the things that we care about. Mm-hmm. And everything around them is why we care about them, what's happening to them.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I think that we can divide this into two segments almost. Why do you think it's important for D&D players to sort of develop really interesting characters for a good story to matter?
Here, I'm going to be controversial here. I don't think they have to.
Really?
Players don't have to make interesting characters. They can make them as bland as fuck. And it's up to and I will say this, it is up to the DM to make those characters interesting.
So what you describe as interesting, is it the fact that they are put in interesting circumstances, or that the world is interesting and that's what makes these characters interesting?
So I would say it's a little bit of both. Because you, as the DM, it's strange because if a character, say there's like a new player at the table, right? And they're like, I don't really know what I should like play or whatever. You should be like, hey, just play whatever sounds good. Don't worry about the backstory or anything. Just come to my table, play. And then that should be like, you would build their story for them. And as they play, they will start to like actually mold that character into what they want it to be. So start bland, and then you can add detail later. Because if you come to the table with like this super grand, detailed character, you're like, I want it to be this way, this way, this way. Your expectations are going to be ruined. I can almost guarantee every time your expectation is going to be ruined.
Yeah, so Cody, did you have any insights on what your thoughts are?
No, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, like, because playing D&D or different things like that, it's all about what you bring to the table. And if you are not a creative person, but you want to like let your DM know, like, hey, like, I don't really know what I want to do for a background and stuff, like, just come up with something real basic, real simple, and then build from there. You know, you can snowball easily from anything, but DMs are typically more creative individuals because they're the ones that have to be able to tailor to a multitude of different scenarios and abilities. So yeah, I definitely agree with Shaizon. Like, you don't have to have a very intricate backstory, and if you do make one, and then the DM like doesn't really do anything with it, you might actually get too irritated with it and not want to continue to play.
See, I agree and disagree with both of you.
No, he's that scientist on the toothpaste.
No, yeah. The 4 out of 5 dentists recommend. There's number 5 right there.
Fuck both of you guys. All right, so listen. Here's my thoughts on it. All right. So first off, I agree that you don't necessarily need to bring an interesting character to the story. You don't need to have a cool background. Your dude could just be, I'm Bob. I have a wife and kids. I showed up for adventuring because I needed the money.
Yeah.
Like, that could be your whole background, right? What makes Bob interesting is the choices he makes along the adventure. And that is where I think as a player, your backstory and what you come up before you show up at the table isn't the only way that you're producing your character, right? So like interesting things that you do. For example, let's say you run into a pack of goblins. Did you choose to just murder them because they're goblins? Or did you say, hey, you know what? I think these goblins could be allies that we could use to beat a higher level boss. Maybe we use them. Maybe we, and that could be the interesting element to your story and your character that are like, hey, this is what I bring to the table and this is why my character is interesting. So while pre-game actions don't necessarily develop a character. I do think actions in the story apply to make interesting characters.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying more like with the backstory, it's like you have to have something in your backstory where you're not like, I see these goblins, I'm just gonna murder them, and you're like,
so you can even say in my backstory, I have like a whole
hate for goblins,
a whole hate for goblins. But in that one instance, I decided to save them because for plot points, it made more sense to keep these guys as allies than to fight against them in this specific moment.
so that brings it more to when people go more like, this is what my character would do. I feel like,
right? So I think
But
that there's
I would argue that more with like character development than character backstory.
exactly, and that is where I think that if we're going into characters as a whole, like what makes a character interesting. For example, let's go to since we've been talking about anime a lot recently, let's talk about our favorite characters from anime. Who is your favorite character, and what element of that character do you think is the most important?
currently right now, favorite character is Hikari from Jujutsu Kaisen.
Okay,
That's
okay, and why?
well, it's mainly because I don't know why. Okay, he is such a carefree person that it's hilarious, and that's what I love about him. But that's just right now. But like in general, I don't even think I have a. I'm trying to think of a favorite one. I'm stuck on the topic. Go ahead, Cody. I'm trying to think. I'm like,
I would say one of my favorite characters would probably be like from Yu Yu Hakusho, you know, because they all were like teenagers and stuff like that. You know, they're middle school kids going into high school.
So Hiei was your favorite.
Hiei was my favorite, and he wasn't a student or anything like that, but like he lived by a very strict code, and you never really understood until you got later into the series because of like, you know, he had to pretty much like. He got his Shagan eye, but he had to give up something for it, you know, almost like a warlock pact. And he had to give up ever letting his sister know that he's her brother. They hang out, they do all this other stuff, and she constantly talks about like how she's looking for him, and everyone's like, yeah, we'll totally help you. And he is like, yeah, anyone tells her, I'll like, you know, slit your throat. Like, you know, he's like, but he also like when he trained like Kuwabara throughout the series, he went easy on him.
Yeah.
And when you watch him fight, he's like the most ruthless dude out there. Like he slices dudes up, but that's because they're an enemy. And it's not so much that Kuwabara was his friend.
Yeah.
He looked at him that he was so weak that him killing him would be merciful to him.
oh wow.
Yeah, so
Dang.
I think that, and that brings up a good point with like how you build your characters. Like, what do you define as like an enemy, and what do you define as an ally, and how do you make those distinctions? I think for me, when it comes to characters, I think my favorite character from anime is Edward Elric from Full Metal Alchemist.
Okay.
I think the reason why I really enjoyed his character, one, they gave him a crucial flaw. The man is a short king for the rest of his life. Hashtag for all of our short kings. Yeah. I was a short king in middle school. I looked up to Elric. I was like, he's my boy. Yeah. I did drink my milk though, so that's why I'm tall. But regardless, and the reason why I thought his character was really interesting was because he had to suffer in order to become the person that he was. So because of the suffering that he went through, and even though he was like highly intellectual, he decided that he wanted to put his feelings first in a situation where all logic dictated that he shouldn't. He was brutally punished for his actions. And then after that, he has to live with the consequences of that. So like if we relate that back to Dungeons and Dragons, let's say you decide that you really need, like story-wise, it makes no sense to kill this medium level bad. You could use them, etc., like the goblin boss, right? Let's say that you kill them. Now, what is the consequences of you creating that action? You're like, oh, I'm going to kill them just because I have a hatred for goblins. Everything that happens after that develops, you know, consequences to your actions, and that creates the character of these are what's going to happen. The fuck around and find out,
exactly.
Right? DM mentality, but also like that's what makes the story interesting for you as a player. So your players having actions that they then are preceded by counteractions, and that's really what D&D is. I see it as a game of chess. It's every time the player makes the first move, you guys are always white, I am black, and the reason, but not like that.
What? No.
But the reason why is because white moves first, right, in chess.
What?
Yeah.
No, I'm joking.
Racist, I know. How dare they? But whenever they move a piece on the board, I have to counteract and try to play defensively or offensively based off of what they're doing. So I've kind of given this analogy before of the steering wheel and the pedals, right?
Yeah.
Players are the steering wheel. I am the gas and the stop. So I can either, you know, accelerate the game or decelerate the game depending on where I want to go. And that's really what I'm focusing on whenever I'm creating those elements as a counterplay. But ultimately, like that's where interesting character development comes from, right? So if we're looking at characters for like D&D or just storytelling in general, what other elements besides the character then do you guys find most intriguing whenever you're looking at like animes or stories in general, whenever you're like thinking, oh, this is one of my favorite things because?
Oh yeah, definitely. The world they live in, power systems, things like that are like the main thing I look at in anime. I'm like, oh, that's actually really cool. Like, trying to think. For example, as I mentioned, Jujutsu Kaisen, the way they like their power system is so detailed, where it's like certain things, but then like right now there's this battle happening where it's like the strongest people in there.
Spoiler alerts.
Yeah. But yeah, the strongest people are fighting. I will not give context to that because it is pretty new. And it's just insane because they're breaking the power system. But it's cool because they built up such a strong foundation for it that now these characters are abusing it. And it's like, oh, okay, that's actually cool. So, I think the power system is a big thing. And I know that's hard in D&D because they kind of just give you everything.
Well, so scaling for a DM, right? If you're looking at that element, like for example, if you have anyone who's playing, if you're a newer DM and you're trying to play past 5th level or even 10th level, that scaling of like how do you create intriguing bosses or even missions that somebody's going to find it's someone who's like clearly like, oh, now I'm in a leadership role, like I'm basically a low level deity, or like I'm a thorn or like a thune or whatever, like a region or something. Like I'm the protector of the realm. Now, how do I scale that? So that's really where like I would say power system and scaling in D&D starts playing into effect. But Cody, what were your thoughts on most important elements?
Like world building and stuff like that, like it's cool, but I mean, like so many times I just find like, okay, we're walking through a forest or we're going through a dungeon. Like to me, like it's not always important. Like unless we're going like way off the books, like we're doing like a water-based one or a space, something like that. Then it's like, okay, like now I got to think like outside of my world of possibilities because you get so accustomed to everything. Like you look at like certain animes and stuff like that. Like, would that character be any different if he was on a different planet, a different setup and different things like that? Or would it be pretty much the same just with a different backdrop?
Yeah, so I mean, if we went into your idea of that, then so like let's look at Naruto versus One Piece, for example, because we've had a lot of One Piece debates in the previous days. Imagine if Naruto was inside the One Piece verse and Luffy was inside of the Naruto verse. Who do you think has a distinct advantage and why?
Luffy had the advantage.
Would have an advantage in a world of Naruto?
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
Because there's no water.
There is water there.
But not like the ocean, not island hopping and being out at sea and sea battles and stuff like that.
Not with his powers, but just the character himself is what I'm saying. So Naruto, who wouldn't have the access to ninjutsu, like the skill sets that he developed.
Just personality. Yeah.
Just personality-wise.
They're kind of the same, right?
It's about the same to me then. If you're going on that way, like I don't see a big difference between like one way or the other for like world scenario stuff. Like it doesn't change a whole lot to me.
Exactly, unless we add in the elements of their specific character traits that they gain from their world. So putting themselves with their abilities would change the dynamics, because essentially all shonen manga like characters are the same personality. They're all Goku knockoffs.
Yeah.
Like that's really like it's
Some of them, yeah.
I'm strong, I'm dumb. But at the same time, I can fuck people up in a fight. That's their whole mentality.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It's not so much the world aspect of it, but it is going to be what makes it interesting to me is the power aspects of it.
Yeah, so
you know, so like if you are a person that can, you just cast Eldritch Blast nonstop? Or are you like a sorcerer that can cast the all powerful fireball? Or
this guy,
I'm just saying, or like Hellish Rebuke, like you play a character with low AC, but you get hit and you blast them back for 10 times the damage. Like there are a lot of things that I find that way more interesting because in your mind you got this like epic spell battle going on, and you're not so much focused on like, oh yeah, I'm in a forest or I'm in the ocean or stuff like that. To me, that's what makes it exciting and just more intriguing to me, I guess.
I see what you're saying, but also I see you have to add context to that spell battle.
Yeah.
So it can't just be like, oh, these random, you know what I mean? So that's why I would say the power scaling, different things like that. Like so for example, you're in the forest, right? Going forward, normal stuff, right? And then a bunch of bandits come out and you're fighting these bandits and you just kill them with your spells and there's just another spellcaster and the bandits. That's not as cool because you can be like, oh, after you killed this bandit, you picked up his spell book and now you see like, oh, he was one of the like prodigy students at this one place. And you're like, my character just literally slayed a prodigy student in a spell battle. That's sick. So then you want to add that extra context. So it can't just be like, oh, random backdrop, because you want to be like, you have to add those locations, those people, those things to it, and then that's what, you know what I'm saying? Then
Yeah,
it has that extra
and I
layer.
agree with that.
Yeah.
It's more in depth of like the world building and stuff like that.
Yeah, and so I think like if we dive into like basically sort of the two elements that you said, so like initially like the world building has little effect of the backdrop. Like even if you look at a lot of anime, like the backdrop really matters, but not really. Like
Yes,
it's
very
mostly just like visual effect.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like the general thing is, especially in battle manga, which is really what we're discussing here. Battle manga is very much that way. D&D had a play style of that for a lot of players. It's like all I want to do is focus on combat, 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 combat. But that's not the only way you have to play. So, for example, when we were talking about power systems, right? So one of the things I really think that's really interesting about like novels and a lot of like other mediums besides just manga or anything, like they have to have a certain, like the magic system matters to me the most.
Yes.
So when I look at like novels, like when I'm reading these novels, I'm reading like, why does their magic system work? Like, how does it work? Why does it matter? How do I break the laws and rules of this world in order to create like a system, right? Because ultimately the biggest problem that you run into for anime, which isn't something you really find inside of other mediums, which besides Dungeons and Dragons, is power scaling.
Yes.
So power scaling, whenever you're looking at anime, is like eventually you get to a point where you're like, okay, my heroine learns this thing, and now they are a god.
Yeah.
And so essentially it's the same thing as being like a level 15, 16, like D&D character. I'm essentially now a god.
Yeah.
Nothing affects me. Fuck you. DM, what do you got for me? What are you going to throw at me? Well, I can only throw earth-shattering stuff at people in order to.
Yeah.
I can, and so like that's really where you have to be like, okay, well, how do I make that different? I don't think that you always have to go with the physical battle. I think that some of the most interesting series, like Death Note, for example, is one of my favorite series, focused on psychological or even like social conflicts and warfare as a way of creating a new type of storytelling for D&D. So, for example, rather than fighting a big bad who's like, whole motivation is I'm evil because I'm evil, like maybe there are like real reasons they want to create change in a society where magic is here and plentiful, but yet there's poverty and like fucked up like dead people. Like, hey, I want to end people suffering, so I'm going to infinity snap half the population away because I want to like save them. Like the reason why Thanos was so good as a villain was because he had like a real motivation.
Playing with shit, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's one of the areas where like in battle mangas or even in stories in general, like that should be the focal point is stop worrying so much about your hero because your players, especially if you're a DM, are going to be the ones creating those.
Yeah.
Focus on the villains and what their motives are and why their motives should matter even more than the players.
That makes sense, yeah. 100%. Yeah, I agree with that. 100%.
And I mean, like you look at like the simple aspects of like where are they going to go against as a DM? You know, like okay, well these guys are obviously good against like this type of a creature. Now I'm going to throw something way left curve at them because ironically the game is called Dungeons and Dragons. You know how many times I've fought a dragon?
So
Very rarely.
as Shaizon, he hasn't fought one yet. He's seen it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But you know like how scary they are. I mean, because like everyone's looked at a monster manual and seen like the CR ratings between different things, you know. But sometimes like I fought against like a coven of sea hags and they bad. You know, at low level they are tough. You know, unless you get rid of one to make the coven like break apart. You know, like there are specific strategies for certain creatures that. Like even simple cats, you know.
He's talking about lions in Dungeons and
Lions, like pack tactics.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant a house cow was going to be like, whoa.
No. Like lions and tigers and what's the other big one? Leopard or what?
Anything that has pack tactics or pounce.
Oh, yeah.
essentially.
Pack tactics is
Because
great,
pounce,
yeah.
they get advantage. They can knock you prone, and when you're prone, they're going to come over and just maul the crap out of you. And there's nothing you can do about it, you know. And they are very low. Like I think a lion's like what, like a 1 CR or something like that. Like it's not very challenging, but you get 3 or 4 of those things out there that all have advantage on attacks and knock you prone, then continue to have advantage.
That does bring me to a point, though. What you just said is like, I feel like a lot of people stress about the powers scaling a little bit too. Like a lot. They'll be like, oh my God, I have a level 20 party. What should I do now? It's like, okay, if you really think about it, most of the time players don't use half their resources. So you can just be like, all right, I'm going to throw this. And they're like, oh, I don't have anything. Cause I realized like at my like Dungeons and Dragons game, I have to sometimes be like, you know, you have this, you know, that's the whole reason I threw that at you at a certain point. Cause they're just like freaking out that they can't do anything. I'm like, think for a minute, just think.
Yeah. So if we dive into that idea, especially if we go into like back into the anime world, right? I think sometimes even like the artist or like the creators forget some of the abilities that their characters have.
God, man.
Like, and then they forget that they're like, oh, hey, by the way, like this is a huge thing that this character got like 4 or 5 seasons ago, and it's like, oh, why isn't this come back into play?
Dude, I hate that so much.
Well,
that might be my biggest pet peeve.
Did you watch the Dragon Ball Super?
Yes.
When he brought Kaioken back,
Yeah.
like
See, that is the man. You just
Because I was like, why doesn't that stack with Super Saiyan?
Right?
And
Yeah.
they got rid of it after Cell Games, and I was like, oh my god, dude, like,
my God,
and that's what I'm saying, like,
they got rid of that after Frieza.
yeah.
Like he went Super
They
Saiyan,
did
it
a
was like
special-
non-existent
They
ever
did a
again.
special and brought it back. But
yeah,
yes,
but so then if we're going into that idea of like power systems and how
I love the Kaioken. Kaioken as a kid, I was like, that's so cool. I don't know why.
see, like in anime world, I think my favorite magic system besides Full Metal Alchemist
Mm-hmm.
comes from Hunter x Hunter, which is the same creator of Inuyasha, or for Yu Yu Hakusho, is what I was talking about before. But their magic system works
creator.
because of Nen. So essentially, the main thing that I thought was really stupid about like some of the systems is like you're either a special user because you like had something happen. Like you're talking about Jujutsu Kaisen, right?
Yeah.
How do they get curse energy? They're just born with it.
Yeah, it depends, yeah. Because you can kind of become a sorcerer, but yeah.
But like essentially, like it's something you're born with, or Naruto, like everyone has chakra, and it's like, why do you have chakra? Or even if you go to like the Avatar verse, like how do you guys get the 4 elements? Well, these like giant lion turtles had all the had the elements, or
that
whatever,
is
right?
Avatar always had a strange little thing going
Yeah, so it's like when you're looking at like power systems or like how people develop those powers, and then you start thinking about that too in like your world structures for like D&D. So let's talk about like how would magic have been created in your world? And there's a lot of references in D&D books that you can use, but for example, if you're making a homebrew world, why is magic important? Why are we using magic?
See, you about to get me talking about my homebrew world. Don't get me talking about my homebrew world. So right now in my world, for example, like paladins, for example, paladins, clerics, right? They have a certain amount of deity magic that they can technically use because god magic is technically it's like different than other things. So yes, they can call on their gods and do like this crazy stuff. Like for example, I had a paladin in my campaign and he could like go into like a god mode pretty much. But when he does that, he like shortens his lifespan by like 10 years and he's a human.
So
it's
basically
like,
hockey?
yes. So pretty much like if you're a paladin, most paladins don't grow old because they die from like they actually because they're taking in that god's energy and the mortal body is not meant for it. So that's like the whole
literally
point.
hockey from like One Piece. Okay.
And I was like, it's super sick because you have to add those certain things, like wizards, for example, if they do certain things like with their spells, they have to at a certain point, like once you start casting those like 6 level spells, you have to like start rolling to see if you can actually cast them because these is just powerful magic. You're messing with the weave, and it's like actually causing like wild magic surge. But it won't be like insane like off the wild magic, But it'll be like little backfire effects.
Because I always think of like when you're talking about like magic and like where it comes from in the world, it's like fairy tale. You know, some of them get from dragons. Some of them have to like what's her face had to use the keys to. She was a celestial sorcerer. And
different
stuff like
types
that.
of magics. Yeah.
And like it almost seemed like you can learn or like ascertain those powers like through like any means that you can find. But then you also got like crazy benefits from it. You know, like when he ate fire, that wasn't produced by him. Regained his strength, regained his abilities. Metal Dragon, that was still the most nutty. Like,
but then like it also falls into that realm of like power scaling because power scaling late game was really really hard for that anime. Like I was like, how do you make this even fair anymore? Like who are you fighting?
Power of friendship.
Yeah.
well, I mean, look at the Dragon Ball Z thing. He went from fighting, like in the original Dragon Ball, the big bad was Piccolo. That was like the final one. Before that, it was Tien Shinhan, before they became friends. Then you go into the next one. Then you had Raditz, you had Vegeta, then you got the Frieza.
So
and the leveling, like you look at the power levels.
Yeah, so that kind of dives into our next question. So then it's that's building arcs, right? So story arcs. So when you're thinking about story elements, right? Story arcs are something that you can do that. For example, tiering your story arcs to create higher level villains because like you said, maybe the Hiei analogy of you're too weak for me to even care about killing you right now because you don't matter to me.
Yeah.
So now as you scale up, well, now you're becoming a problem. When I see you, oh, now you're a problem. Oh, shit, I have to kill you. Fuck, I died. Now my boss is going to kill you. That.
No,
like,
100%.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, always do arcs, and that's the best way to do it.
So then how do you guys do your arcs? Like what's a strategy you guys use when building arcs?
Ooh, that's a tough one because I'm gonna be honest with you. Like I said, my campaign's mainly improv. So when it comes down to it, I just kind of just wing it. But I usually like kind of think ahead and I'll be like, oh, we're going to this like area where they need to get some type of, MacGuffin or something. And oh, that's kind of near this player's like where this player wanted their stuff to be from. And then I kind of just be like, this is that player's arc. And I kind of section it as in the player's development, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What about you, Cody?
So I look a lot into what the party is doing, like what their strengths are and stuff like that, because I always want to throw them a challenge because I don't want them to make it seem like it is just so easy, like everything I throw in front of them. Because some people, they're really good with large quantities of people. They got big AoE spells and different things like that. Other times they have singular one target things. Yeah. So if I do send like a horde at them, that's going to be a lot more difficult for them. So sometimes like that one, I sent all those cats at them and they were all like level 3, level 4 characters and they almost got TPK'd from 5 cats because there's 3 of them.
Yeah.
Volume sometimes is is stronger than sending out just one big bad.
Oh, for sure.
And people forget that all the time when they look like, oh, I got to find this. Oh, this is way too strong. Oh, this is okay. But then you also give them outs for just like using an ability that like, hey, it might bite you in the butt in the long run. Because I think I had a scenario set up for them to where they were given the jar of containment. Oh, yeah, so it can capture any one monster in there, but it can only hold one at a time. So they had it and they got it right before they went into a lair with a big red dragon. Okay,
that's sick. Yeah,
so it's like, okay, do you use this? Because you don't know if there's something in it already.
Yeah.
So they use it. And then what's the creature with the backwards hands?
Backwards hands.
Oh, it's like a demon cat guy. I forget.
Oh, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. They like make deals and bullshit.
Yeah. Well, that was what was inside of it. And so when he
Rakashaka.
Rakashaka. So they got the dragon in, but then he came out and he was way stronger than them. Yeah. And they're like, what do we do? But he was like trying to be real deceptive and everything like that. So it's like you also not only have to make sure that you are strong enough like physically, but your characters have to be like sharp enough to be able to pay attention and know what they're doing, because sometimes you literally have party members like in your D&D play group that just like swing first, ask questions later. And then they end up getting the whole party TPK because they aggroed something they shouldn't have.
So I guess it's just because of my background or whatever. I don't approach like arcs in the same way you guys do. I don't look at a monster and go, that's the monster I want to do. I look at the world that I've created. I look at the elements for what makes the most sense story-wise of the progression of the characters. So let's say, for example, the beginning stages of like an arc 0 through 5 style campaign, right? Because that's really where the meat and potatoes of story building happens. I start you off in, say, like a town or a region or whatever. Like we'll go to Dice Age, right? I start you off in a new location. You're a bunch of new adventurers. You're establishing yourself. You're establishing your connections. Whatever connections you create, those become your allies. Whatever ones you make from enemies, those become your enemies. And so ultimately, you guys are creating your future enemies and your future allies. And you can use those elements to basically be like, okay, well, they chose to go with siding with the humans over the kobolds, right? Okay, well, since you chose the humans, now kobolds have a red dragon on their side. That's what's coming at you versus, well, if you would have sided with the kobolds, you could have used the red dragon to destroy the humans who essentially had, like, let's say they had, I don't know, a giant amongst their mix that they were able to fight. So then that's how you can do those like giant Godzilla style fights. And I don't think that every single story arc, like climactic moment, has to be where your character's in the middle of it. They might be viewing it, but for example, if there's a huge like cinematic battle where you're like, okay, I want to have this giant demon and this monster slug fight, just let them fight and watch your players watch this moment of like, these are really high level battles, like the world shattering events, like level 20 level stuff. We can't interact with that. Like, what the fuck are we supposed to do? Just sit here, eat the popcorn, and enjoy the storytelling.
And that's some of the things I do enjoy. It's like, you get some of these characters that like, they just want to be involved in everything. And not every fight that your DM throws at you is winnable.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't like that though. See,
I would get a character like yours and you'd be like, oh, I want to get in there and I want to mess this thing up. But everyone's going to be like, dude, we are like level 3. That's a level 20. Like, there ain't no way. Like, we're going to have to come back later, because sometimes that's just what you need for the character development, for the story development. You know, like I had it written off as like, you know, like essentially Tiamat like took over the world, you know, and like there was nothing you could do about it. You got like cast away, and then essentially the same thing that Justin's doing, as in like the character, like you sided with one side or the other. Well, he did that to you and your friends. Now you're coming back with vengeance. Then you will be able to do it.
No, yeah, that's fine. But I think that you should also give the players some type of agency in that moment. Absolutely. So, for example, if there's like, oh, there's this demon, there's this giant dragon fighting this giant in general, you're like, oh, okay, this is cool. But what can the players do in a way to make one side lean a little bit heavier? So not necessarily, oh, I joined the battle and I killed a giant dragon. It's like, get out of here, you're level 3. Yeah. It's like, oh, I'm going to help the villagers. Yeah. You see a town of villagers burning. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to help them.
That's how you tier things in the scalable sense of like how I do the tiers, right? So, for example, you see this giant calamity happening. Let's say the world is literally ending, and you have to choose between leaving the earth with everyone else or staying to fight. Which do you choose? Okay, well, I choose to stay and fight. Okay, so what happens that your characters aren't just going to die here at level 3?
Exactly.
But they still get that progression. So maybe they're not fighting the big bad, but the big bad's always going to have minions.
Yes, so 100%. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, you got to give them that agency, because it's not necessarily that as a player you're going to be like, I want to kill that big bad that's fighting. You're going to be like, no, but like, okay, the big bads are fighting. I don't really give a shit.
Yes. I get that. Yeah. Let's say it's a necromancer, and you're just like, okay, well, the necromancer's over there fighting an angel right now, literal angels. But he has like 4 zombies over here that are like attacking this little kid in my face. And so oftentimes like how I create like that sense of urgency is I take what I think based off the characters' backgrounds, and that's where backgrounds and character development.
100%.
For me, where you guys were saying it doesn't matter, I think it matters to me the most, because it's like, what does your character do in these type of situations? If you see someone dying, are you going to rush in? Are you not going to rush in? If you're not going to be the kind of person who would rush in, you just watch, I might throw a puzzle at you, because that would be a more interesting style for you to be able to enjoy, like dungeon crawl style campaigns.
And this is why I say like backstory doesn't matter, is because when you throw that at the player, that's when the player is then like, okay, now I think I like, now for example, once they choose a trait, don't be like, oh, I switch it up, my character actually hates goblins. But be at the point where it's like, okay, this kid's, a building's falling, right? You have a chance. You can either grab this kid, or you can grab this, say, old lady that's also right there.
Or you can grab their purse.
Yes, or your purse, exactly. And then the player, say they're playing like a rogue, right? And they're like, well, my rogue actually, you know, I feel like he would care about this. He does that. Now his character has a set trait, and then you continue on from there. You're like, oh, sick.
And that's where actions come into play.
Well, and also what your alignment is.
Yeah,
I think the alignment is a huge thing to get like characters to stick with, because they get so caught up and confused to where it's like, is it just like, is this how Shaizon would play this, or is this how Shaizon's character would play this? You know, and like for me, like I think the funnest way of any alignment to play is lawful evil. I think that is the funnest way to play any campaign, because it is my way. And I don't care what I do, but that is justified in my mind. Yeah. You know?
But you also have to remember that you're at a table with a bunch of other people. And so ultimately, just because you think a character idea is great, like let's say you created the lawful evil dude who's like, well, my entire lifestyle is I'm going to decapitate anyone who wrongs me in any way, and I'm going to justify that in my head because I'm just a toxic player, because we all know that guy who wants to play D&D but probably shouldn't. And so because of that mindset, they're like, well, my character would do this. That is the biggest point of BS ever. Just because your character could do this doesn't mean you have to create a character that would do that.
No, I agree with that.
And so that's where it's like, that's where session zeros, that's where the pre-planning of the story, and also creating characters that make sense for the world. So like, if you have a blank slate guy, like you're like, hey, here's my cookie cutter McGuy.
See, there you go. That's what I mean. Like, you have to have some personality to him.
Yeah. But like, if you have a cookie cutter McGuy, right, and you're like, well, I can put him in any world, that's fine. But there is going to be one crucial element, and that's going to be whatever the theme of the story. For example, most DMs, all 3 of us included, have played campaigns where we're like, this is the theme of the story I'm telling.
Session 0, yeah.
And so that's where it's like, for example, when I did the Space One shot that you guys played in, Dice Age, Monster Manual, anything that I do, I come up with a theme first. And then once I have my theme, I wrap around what kind of world I would do based off of that theme. Then I create my arcs. Then I create my bads based off of the character's actions. And from there, I move into how do I create a really interesting story that gives everyone what they want, which is closure to their ultimate goals and stuff, but also like ensure that everyone at the table feels included.
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
Well, we're going to go ahead and cut there, guys. We'll see you guys next week for another deep dive into this topic or another one. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you guys next time on Resource Gather.